Today is a hard day. For those of us who follow the Christian path, this is one of the most difficult day of the year. Today, once again, we are confronted with a wrenching truth. God sent us his Son, his only Son, Jesus, who came to humankind to teach us how to live, to show us how to love, to inspire us how to be. And what did we do? We didn't just ignore Jesus. We didn't just fail to listen or didn't follow properly or fall away. No. We killed him, we humans. We killed Jesus. It's horrifying to contemplate. And fortunately, we know that this is not where the story ends. And it is really, really tempting to just jump ahead to the happy ending of tomorrow. But we're not there yet, not quite. And difficult as it is, we are invited to wait, to stay where we are for just a little while longer. Some years ago, while I was at a religious workshop, I met a Christian from a different sect from ours, a very devout person. During one of the breaks, we started talking about religion, as one does, and eventually we started talking about Holy Week. At that time, it was about 4 weeks away. She said something that I found so extraordinary that I still remember it years later. She said that of all the days of Holy Week, she found Good Friday to be the most helpful and inspiring, so much so that she almost looked forward to it every year. As you may have noticed from my sermon, I do not look forward to Good Friday every year, so I asked her to please tell me more. She said that the story that we have just heard, the story that we have walked through all this week that is so central to our faith, reminded her of just how horrifyingly evil humanity really is, that our basic nature is utterly depraved, sinful, and fallen. It reminds her of how desperately we need God's grace, and what an incredible gift it is to us that God grants it to us. That filled her with love and gratitude, and deepened her desire to serve God even more. I could see her point of view, but I wasn't, and am still not, entirely sure that I agree with it. Then again, I am not a member of her branch of Christianity, and there's a reason for that. Yes, this is a story about human evil, about betrayal, cowardice, and greed. There is lusting for power. There is jealousy. There are structural wrongs and injustices, a sham of a trial with no evidence other than hearsay, a regime that really only cared about keeping the peace at whatever the price and acted in horrifying, brutal ways to make sure of it. This happened back then, and it still happens today. We only need to look online or watch the news to see similar stories. But that's not all there is to this story. We see a few glimmers of human goodness too. Mary Magdalene, Jesus' mother, and John, others watched and waited with him at the foot of the cross. They couldn't save him. They couldn't stop it or even ease his pain. But they did the one thing that they could. They made sure that he didn't die alone. And although we don't hear about this in tonight's readings, Nicodemus, the council member, provided costly spices to anoint Jesus' body, and Joseph of Arimathea offered him his own tomb for his burial, and even went to Pilate himself to get permission to bury him. They risked their position and status to honor Jesus' memory and his ministry. So while evil is front and center in this story, it is not the whole story, and it's sometimes helpful to remember that. Especially since so many of us have been taught to imagine ourselves in this story. Were any of you taught to do this in Sunday school or in youth group? To picture the story and imagine what you would have done, who you would have been? What would we do? Would we run away or deny knowing Jesus, like Peter? Would we be mocking bystanders, or even worse, active participants like the soldiers? Or would we be brave, but ultimately helpless, like Mary Magdalene, and John? This is a poignant reminder that sometimes we are powerless in the face of suffering and evil. And if we're witnessing it, sometimes the only thing we can do is show up and be there for our loved ones. And this is an important and sacred act. But this leads me to another question, one that haunted me all week as I thought about this sermon. Where is God in all of this? We see humanity's failings and limits only too well. But where is God? Trying to answer this question sent me down a theological rabbit hole, full of doctrine and dogma, disputations and arguments. I'll spare you the details. But I even spent several hours analyzing some of the liturgies in our prayer book. And while I found some very interesting and valuable information that hopefully I'll be able to use in a paper at some point, as I thought about preaching tonight, I only got more and more confused and uncertain about what to say. So I finally took a little break, and that's when it hit me, of course. I was focusing on the wrong thing. I was so busy trying to figure out the meaning of the cross. I took my eyes off of the cross, and I almost missed the last gift of Jesus' earthly ministry. So let's take a look at those last moments together. What did Jesus do? What did he say? Well, as we heard just now, he made sure that his mother was taken care of, like a good and a beloved son. In other versions of the story, not the one we heard tonight, he forgave the thief that was crucified with him and assured him that he would be with him in paradise. Even dying on the cross, he ministered to another. But what else? In the Passion reading from the Gospel of Mark that we heard on Sunday, he cried out in despair. We said it ourselves, the same words, earlier this evening when we recited Psalm 22. His last words in that gospel are, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Scriptures tell us he knew what was coming, and he planned for it and prepared for it, and tried, unsuccessfully, to help his followers understand and get ready too. But even though while he was on the cross, Jesus felt forsaken by God. And that is actually a gift for us, even though it may not feel that way, because this means that it's okay for us to feel that way too. So when suffering comes into our lives, as it almost always does, maybe not today, but tomorrow or sometime, or maybe for some of us, maybe it is today. If this is you, if you woke up this morning and the sun shining in felt like a cruel joke, if your limbs were weighted down, and if you couldn't possibly imagine how you would get through the next few minutes, let alone an entire day. If this is you, and you think that no one cares, and no one could possibly understand, and that you are all alone. Please remember, feeling lost, lonely, or forgotten by God is not a sin. You are not wrong or bad or evil for feeling this way, because Jesus felt the same way too. On this holy night of Good Friday, may we all be given the strength to share and witness to one another's sufferings, and the steadfastness to wait and watch in hope. Amen.